There is something deeply misleading about how we imagine ancient Egypt. We picture pyramids, gold masks, towering temples, but rarely do we ask the most basic question of all: how did anyone survive there? Because ancient Egypt was not just hot. It was relentlessly, dangerously hot. Summer temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. Shade was limited. Rain was rare. The sun was not a backdrop. It was an omnipresent force that dictated survival. Entire modern cities struggle to function at those temperatures without air conditioning. Power grids fail, asphalt melts, hospitals overflow, and yet, for over 3,000 years, Egypt not only survived, it flourished. Millions of people lived, worked, built, and aged in that heat without fans, without refrigeration, without electricity of any kind. That wasn't luck. And it certainly wasn't brute endurance. The truth is uncomfortable for the modern world. The ancient Egyptians understood heat better than we do. Not at a technological level, but at a biological, architectural, and environmental one. They did not fight the climate. They designed their civilization around it. Every house, every street, every schedule, and every material choice was a response to heat. Nothing was accidental. The thickness of walls, the height of ceilings, the placement of windows, the rhythm of daily life. These weren't aesthetic preferences, they were survival strategies refined over centuries of observation. And here's the part that should make us pause. Many of these techniques are more energy efficient than anything we use today. They didn't rely on machines to correct bad design. They designed it correctly from the start. Before we talk about pyramids and temples, we need to understand the real achievement of ancient Egypt. It wasn't a monument building. It was climate mastery, and it began with a river. The Nile was never just a river. It was Egypt's climate control system. Long before the invention of fans or compressors, the ancient Egyptians understood a principle modern cities still ignore. Water changes temperature behavior. The Nile did more than provide food and transportation. It shaped airflow, moderated heat, and stabilized the brutal desert climate in ways that made permanent settlement possible. During the day, the desert surrounding the Nile heated rapidly. Sand and rock absorbed solar radiation and released it back into the air, creating intense thermal pressure. The river behaved differently. Water heats and cools far more slowly than land. While the desert baked, the Nile remained comparatively cool. That temperature difference mattered. Warm air over the desert rose. Cooler air above the river sank. The result was a daily convection cycle that pulled cooler, moisture-rich air inland. This wasn't a theory. Egyptians built it to exploit it. Cities, villages, and temples were aligned along the river's path not just for irrigation, but for airflow. Homes were oriented to catch prevailing breezes moving off the water, especially in the late afternoon when heat peaked. Streets ran parallel to wind corridors created by the river's shape. At night, as desert temperatures dropped quickly, cool air flowed back toward the river, flushing heat from dense urban areas. Humidity, often blamed today for discomfort, worked differently in Egypt. The Nile's moisture slowed dehydration, reduced heat stress, and softened temperature extremes near inhabited zones. Combined with shade and airflow, it created microclimates that were dramatically more livable than the open desert only a few kilometers away. The riverbanks themselves were thermal buffers. Vegetation cooled the ground through evapotranspiration. Mud brick structures near the Nile absorbed less heat than exposed stone in the desert interior. Even agricultural canals acted as cooling channels, pulling lower temperatures into populated spaces. Modern cities treat rivers as scenic features. Ancient Egypt treated the Nile as infrastructure. They didn't build beside it by coincidence. They built there because they understood that controlling heat begins with controlling air and water, not electricity. The Nile didn't just make Egypt fertile, it made it habitable. And once the Egyptians mastered natural cooling at the landscape level, they pushed the same principles into their architecture, one wall at a time. The materials ancient Egyptians built with were not chosen for beauty. They were chosen for physics. Mud brick was the foundation of everyday Egyptian life. Made from Nile silt, straw, and water, it dried slowly under the sun, forming thick, dense blocks with one critical property: thermal mass. Mud brick absorbs heat slowly and releases it even more slowly. During the day, walls soaked up solar energy without immediately passing it into interior spaces. By the time that heat began to move inward, the sun was already setting. At night, when desert temperatures dropped sharply, those same walls released stored heat back into the open air, not into living spaces. The result was a passive temperature delay. Interiors stayed cooler during the hottest hours and warmer when nights turned cold. No machines, no fuel, just material intelligence. Stone served a different role. Temples and monuments were built from limestone and sandstone, not because they were indestructible, but because they reflected sunlight and resisted thermal penetration. Polished limestone, especially when coated with light plaster, bounced solar radiation away instead of absorbing it. This reduced surface temperatures and prevented heat from migrating indoors. Thickness mattered. Walls weren't thin by necessity, they were thick by design. In some homes, exterior walls exceeded half a meter. That mass acted as a thermal shield, blocking rapid heat transfer in both directions. Modern buildings often rely on insulation to correct poor material choices. Egyptian architecture needed none. The structure itself was the insulation. This wasn't accidental knowledge. It was empirical science developed over centuries of trial, error, and observation. Builders understood which materials worked, which failed, and why. The result was architecture that cooperated with the climate instead of fighting it. And once materials were optimized, the Egyptians turned to something even more precise: orientation. Where and how buildings faced the sun itself. At first glance, ancient Egyptian cities looked poorly planned. Homes rarely faced the rising or setting sun. Streets didn't align neatly with cardinal directions. Windows were small, irregular, and often avoided direct sunlight altogether. To a modern eye trained on symmetry and visibility, it looks inefficient. It wasn't. Egyptian builders understood something fundamental: orientation determines temperature. In a climate where heat was the primary threat, sunlight was not something to invite, it was something to control. Buildings were positioned to minimize solar exposure during the hottest parts of the day, particularly the brutal afternoon sun. East-facing openings were limited. Morning light was tolerated because temperatures were lower. West-facing exposure, where the sun strikes hardest and longest, was actively avoided. Walls were angled, offset, or shielded to block low-angle solar radiation that penetrates deeply and heats interiors rapidly. Streets were narrow not because of crowding, but because narrowness creates shade. As the sun moved across the sky, buildings shaded one another, preventing prolonged exposure on any single surface. This created urban canyons where air temperatures could be several degrees cooler than open areas. Ceilings were high for a reason: hot air rises. By increasing vertical space, Egyptians allowed heat to collect above the living zone, keeping occupants cooler at ground level. Some homes even included small upper vents to release trapped heat, creating a slow, continuous airflow without mechanical assistance. Doors and windows were placed to encourage cross-ventilation, capturing prevailing breezes while blocking direct sunlight. Light entered rooms indirectly, bouncing off plastered surfaces rather than streaming in as heat. Modern architecture often prioritizes views, glass, and openness, features that trap heat and demand energy-intensive cooling. Egyptian architecture prioritized survivability. Their buildings didn't fight the sun, they sidestepped it. And once orientation was mastered, Egyptians refined their strategy further by controlling darkness, not light. To the ancient Egyptians, darkness was not a flaw, it was a tool. Modern design equates light with comfort. Large windows, open plans, glass walls, these are sold as signs of progress. In a desert climate, they are liabilities. The Egyptians understood this intuitively. Light brings heat, heat drains energy, and survival depended on limiting both. Egyptian homes were deliberately dim, windows were small, set high, and often covered with wooden lattices or stone grills. These openings allowed air to move while preventing direct sunlight from penetrating interior spaces. The goal was illumination without radiation. Walls did most of the work. Thick mud brick barriers blocked heat during the day and released it slowly at night. This thickness also muffled the sun's intensity, creating stable interior temperatures that barely fluctuated despite brutal conditions outside. In many cases, indoor temperatures remained 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the exterior during peak heat. Rooms were arranged hierarchically. Public or workspaces faced outward, absorbing heat. Living and sleeping areas were placed deeper inside, protected by multiple layers of walls. This spatial buffering created cool cores, zones of thermal stability where the body could recover from heat stress. Doorways were narrow and recessed, reducing the amount of hot air entering while still allowing movement. Some were shaded by overhangs or adjacent walls, creating permanent shadow zones that acted as temperature filters between inside and out. Darkness also slowed dehydration. Lower light levels reduced metabolic strain and prevented unnecessary sweating. Combined with airflow and thermal mass, it allowed the human body to maintain equilibrium without constant water loss. This wasn't deprivation, it was regulation. Egyptians weren't trying to brighten their homes, they were trying to survive in them. And once interior heat was controlled, they turned their attention outward, using surfaces, colors, and finishes to reject the sun before it ever reached the walls. Walls did most of the work. Thick mud brick barriers blocked heat during the day and released it slowly at night. This thickness also muffled the sun's intensity, creating stable interior temperatures that barely fluctuated despite brutal conditions outside. In many cases, indoor temperatures remained 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the exterior during peak heat. Rooms were arranged hierarchically. Public or workspaces faced outward, absorbing heat. Living and sleeping areas were placed deeper inside, protected by multiple layers of walls. This spatial buffering created cool cores, zones of thermal stability where the body could recover from heat stress. Doorways were narrow and recessed, reducing the amount of hot air entering while still allowing movement. Some were shaded by overhangs or adjacent walls, creating permanent shadow zones that acted as temperature filters between inside and out. Darkness also slowed dehydration. Lower light levels reduced metabolic strain and prevented unnecessary sweating. Combined with airflow and thermal mass, it allowed the human body to maintain equilibrium without constant water loss. This wasn't deprivation, it was regulation. Egyptians weren't trying to brighten their homes, they were trying to survive in them. And once interior heat was controlled, they turned their attention outward, using surfaces, colors, and finishes to reject the sun before it ever reached the walls. The ancient Egyptians didn't try to cool buildings from the inside. They stopped heat at the surface. Color mattered. Texture mattered. Finish mattered. Long before modern concepts like albedo or solar reflectance, Egyptians understood that light surfaces repel heat, while dark ones absorb it. This knowledge shaped everything from temples to modest homes. Limestone was a preferred building material not only for its availability, but for its reflectivity. When freshly cut and polished, limestone is pale, almost white. It reflects a significant portion of incoming solar radiation, keeping surface temperatures lower than darker stone or exposed mud brick. Many structures were also coated with light-colored plaster made from gypsum or lime, increasing reflectivity even further. This wasn't decorative, it was thermal engineering. Sunlight striking these surfaces was bounced away before it could be absorbed and transferred inward. That reduced heat buildup during the day and prevented interior spaces from becoming thermal reservoirs by nightfall. Even monumental structures benefited. Temples with massive stone walls remained surprisingly cool inside despite relentless sun exposure. Plaster finishes also smoothed surfaces, reducing micro-shadows that trap heat. Smooth, light-colored walls shed solar energy efficiently and cooled faster once the sun moved on. When repainting was needed, it was done not for aesthetics, but for performance. In residential areas, exterior walls were often replastered seasonally, restoring reflectivity lost to dust and weathering. Maintenance was part of climate control. Compare that to modern cities, where dark roofing, asphalt, and glass create urban heat islands that raise temperatures by several degrees. We absorb heat and then spend energy trying to remove it. The Egyptians rejected it outright. Their buildings reflected the sun, their materials slowed heat transfer, and their cities stayed livable without consuming energy. Once surfaces were optimized, they focused on something invisible but powerful: air movement, the most effective cooling tool of all. Once heat was blocked at the surface, ancient Egyptian architects turned to something even more powerful than shade: moving air. Long before electric fans or air conditioning, Egyptians designed their homes to breathe. The central courtyard was the heart of this system. Nearly every well-designed Egyptian house, from modest dwellings to elite residences, was organized around an open courtyard. This space wasn't decorative. It was a thermal engine. During the night, cool desert air settled into the courtyard, chilling the surrounding walls and floors. By morning, this stored coolness radiated back into the rooms as temperatures outside began to climb. As the sun heated the courtyard during the day, warm air rose and escaped upward, creating a natural pressure difference. Cooler air was pulled in through shaded doorways, low windows, and narrow alleys, producing continuous airflow without mechanical force. This is stack ventilation in its purest form, used thousands of years before the term existed. Egyptians also understood prevailing wind patterns. Along the Nile Valley, breezes typically moved from north to south. Homes were oriented to capture these winds, funneling air through interior spaces. Doorways were aligned, walls angled, and openings positioned to guide airflow where people actually lived and slept. Some wealthier homes employed early wind-catching structures, tall walls or roof openings that intercepted higher altitude breezes and directed them downward. Even without elaborate towers, subtle roof height variations created pressure zones that encouraged circulation. Interior spaces were intentionally narrow. Wide, open halls trap heat and stagnate air. Narrow rooms accelerate airflow, increasing evaporative cooling on the skin. Combined with shaded floors and thick walls, this made interiors feel dramatically cooler than the outside temperature. Modern buildings seal themselves tight and then fight physics with compressors and fans. Egyptian buildings cooperated with airflow and gravity. They didn't have cool air. They guided it. And once air was moving, the final step was managing how people lived inside these spaces. Because behavior, not technology, completed the system. Architecture did most of the work, but ancient Egyptians finished the job with behavior. They understood something modern culture often ignores. Staying cool isn't just about buildings. It's about how you live inside them. Daily schedules followed the sun. The most physically demanding work was done early in the morning or late in the afternoon when temperatures were lower. Midday, when heat peaked, activity slowed. Administrative tasks, crafts, and rest were moved indoors into the coolest rooms of the house or shaded public spaces. This wasn't laziness. It was thermal strategy. Clothing played a critical role. Egyptians wore loose, lightweight linen made from flax grown along the Nile. Linen fibers breathe exceptionally well, allowing air to circulate across the skin and sweat to evaporate quickly. Unlike modern synthetic fabrics, linen doesn't trap heat. It releases it. Garments were cut for airflow, not insulation. Wide sleeves, open necklines, and minimal layering maximized heat dissipation. In elite households, multiple outfit changes per day were common, not for fashion, but to stay dry and cool as sweat evaporated. Body cooling extended beyond clothing. Egyptians bathed frequently, often multiple times a day, using water drawn directly from the Nile or stored in shaded vessels. Evaporation from damp skin provided immediate cooling, especially when combined with moving air from courtyards and open doorways. Homes were sparsely furnished for a reason. Heavy textiles, rugs, and upholstered furniture trap heat. Egyptian interiors favored stone floors, reed mats, and minimal clutter, allowing surfaces to cool quickly at night and stay cool longer during the day. Even sleeping arrangements were optimized. People slept on raised beds or platforms, allowing air to circulate underneath the body instead of trapping heat against the floor. Bedrooms were positioned to catch nighttime breezes and were often the most ventilated spaces in the house. Modern society treats heat as an enemy to overpower. Ancient Egyptians treated it as a condition to adapt to. Their survival wasn't based on machines. It was based on understanding the environment and living in harmony with it. Water wasn't just for drinking or irrigation, it was a core part of ancient Egyptian climate control. Every canal, basin, and pond served multiple purposes, including cooling the immediate environment. Evaporation was the secret. As water transitioned from liquid to vapor, it absorbed heat from surrounding surfaces and air, lowering local temperatures. Courtyards often contained shallow pools, and public spaces featured fountains or basins. Even small quantities of water had an outsized effect, especially when combined with airflow from narrow streets or strategically placed windows. Vegetation amplified the effect. Date palms, papyrus, and other Nile-adapted plants shaded walls and courtyards while releasing moisture through transpiration. The combination of water and plants created microclimates, cool islands within the urban heat of stone and mud brick. Residents could move from hotter streets into these zones and immediately feel relief. Even canals functioned as thermal regulators at a city scale. Water cooled the air above it during the day. Wind moving across canals carried this cooler air inland, reaching homes, markets, and temples. In the desert, where temperatures could exceed 40 degrees Celsius, this natural air conditioning was crucial. Egyptians also used water in practical behavioral ways. Sweating was controlled by immersion, bathing, or wetting cloths and hanging them in windows or doorways. This technique enhanced evaporative cooling indoors. Modern cities have largely lost this knowledge, replacing passive water strategies with energy-intensive air conditioning. Egyptians thrived without electricity by leveraging natural water cycles. They didn't fight the climate, they worked with it, creating networks of flowing air, moisture, and shade that kept entire communities comfortable. Water, evaporation, and vegetation weren't just conveniences, they were survival tools that shaped the rhythm of life along the Nile. Ancient Egyptian solutions weren't just historical curiosities, they are lessons for a world struggling with heat, energy, and sustainability. Modern cities, crammed with glass, asphalt, and air conditioners, spend vast amounts of energy trying to fight temperatures that ancient Egyptians managed without electricity. Their techniques remind us that design can cooperate with nature instead of opposing it. The first lesson is material intelligence. Thick mud brick, reflective stone, and plaster weren't ornamental. They were thermal tools. Modern construction favors lightweight materials, often with minimal thermal mass, relying on energy to compensate. Imagine replacing heat-absorbing walls with dense, sun-reflecting materials. Even a small increase in thermal mass and reflectivity dramatically reduces indoor temperatures without energy. The second lesson is orientation and layout. Streets, courtyards, and homes were positioned to maximize shade, airflow, and passive ventilation. Narrow alleys, high walls, and courtyards created microclimates, while building orientation captured prevailing winds and avoided harsh sunlight. Modern urban planning could revive these principles. Shaded streets, angled buildings, and centralized courtyards can significantly reduce heat stress in dense cities. The third lesson is behavioral integration. Egyptians timed activities, wore breathable clothing, used water for evaporative cooling, and arranged sleeping areas for airflow. Architecture alone wasn't enough. The human element completed the system. Modern buildings often ignore occupant behavior, relying solely on mechanical systems, which increases energy consumption and reduces resilience. Finally, water and vegetation are essential. Pools, canals, and plants weren't luxury. They were functional. Evaporation, shade, and transpiration created natural cooling that could span entire neighborhoods. Today, green infrastructure, water features, and urban forests can recreate this effect. The ancient Egyptians didn't invent fans or air conditioning. They achieved the same outcomes using materials, design, and lifestyle. Their solutions were efficient, sustainable, and elegant. We can still learn from them. By studying their techniques, we can reduce energy demand, create comfortable living spaces, and design cities that thrive in heat rather than fight it. The knowledge isn't lost. It's waiting for us to look, learn, and apply it.